make clear, I'm not refuting anything regarding the need to provide it to the defense and whether it's inculpatory or exculpatory. I just wanted to make clear and make sure that I told the court and the defense that we're not asking to use it. We just wanted to, out of an abundance of caution, in the event that it is in some way, in any way exculpatory, give it to the defense. We're not trying to use it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Let's turn back to Mr. Zachary's statement that we were going through yesterday. And Ms. Love, you are going to take the overnight recess to try to determine if there are parts of the proposed redactions that you agree to. And Mr. Shard, I know that, I don't know if it was you or Mr. Atkins that shared the the 3 pages of the proposed redactions with regard to this interview that we're going through right now. And honestly, there's not a date on the binder that y'all gave me, so I don't know what date to reference, but you have proposed redactions for the other interview. Can you share those as well so I have something to go by?
I will. I'll send them over right now.
All right, thank you.
And Your Honor, just for the record, number 38, which is the next one, according to my records, I'm withdrawing my request on that.
Okay,
We don't need to-
thank you. And what is the date of this interview?
This one is April 27, 2017.
April 27th, 2017. All right,
No,
thank you.
April 13,
13th,
2017.
2017. All right, thank you. Okay. So, Ms. Love, I know you're looking for them, but did you get an opportunity, and are there redactions you agreed to?
There were not a lot. There was
Okay.
only one.
But you're going to find whatever that was and let
Right.
us know.
Right.
Okay.
And I marked them in the transcript.
All right.
Actually, the one that I thought that I did agree to, oh, okay, here it is. So number 76, again, the discussion about the injuries
All right.
of certain part of the body, and that would be page 259, line 20.
Yeah. So you agree that that should be redacted?
Yes.
And that's the only one between 39 and 75 that you agree to?
Yes, and the reason that that is the case, I'll just say that I went back and was listening to the context. So
Yes.
I did read Mr. Sharp's reasons for wanting to exclude it, but I wanted to just make sure that it wasn't necessary for a larger reason, and I'm prepared to express and explain why those are.
All right, well then let's just get back to it. We're on number 39.
So, Your Honor, number 39, I was shorthanding this when I wrote yak.
Sure.
When I wrote yak, that's Mr. Kendricks.
Okay.
So my understanding from my recollection is that Investigator Dennis has never spoken to Mr. Kendricks about the murder of Donovan Thomas. Okay, that's my understanding. But either way, whether he's spoken to him or not, I believe he's just using a technique to try to suggest that Mr. Kendricks has said things.
Right. Excuse me.
But to the extent either way, he's putting words in Mr. Kendrick's mouth. Mr. Kendrick may not take the stand. That's up to him. But I don't think it's appropriate for Investigator Dennis to state on a out-of-court statement for the jury to hear what Mr. Kendrick supposedly told him about the events of January 10th, 2000.
And Your Honor, that's at the bottom of.
Yeah.
And I can also provide the court the timestamp for it on the video that we've just given, but it's at 16:32 in the video of this portion of the interview. And when the court is prepared for me to, I can respond.
I'm prepared for you.
Okay. So Judge, I hear and understand what Mr. Shard is saying. I disagree with it. When Investigator Dennis says that Yak says something different, and
my to-do list used to look like this. A jumbled mess, projects back to back, and I would waste so much time not knowing where to start. That's when I started using this AI personal assistant app called Motion. And it has revolutionized my productivity by rearranging my schedule and telling me exactly what to do and when. Okay, so I have a project coming up, so I enter it into the system along with its deadline. Pretty standard stuff. But this is what sets Motion apart. I dump in the urgency of the task and how long I think the project will take. And look at this. AI automatically carves out dedicated time slots in my calendar to make sure I complete my project well before the deadline. And if any last minute meeting comes up, no worries. Motion will automatically readjust my schedule, making sure I still meet all my deadlines. It's like having a personal assistant in my back pocket. So what are you waiting for? Transform your productivity and try Motion for free when you sign up today.
It's time to feed the dogs real food, not highly processed pellets. The farmer's dog is fresh food made with whole meat and veggies. It's not dry food. It's not wet food. It's just real food. It's an idea whose time has come.
they did say it. And when Detective Dennis says, after Mr. Zachary gives him a rendition of events, and Detective Dennis says, Yak says something different, there's nothing about him meeting, and the argument could be made by the defense. You heard Mr. Kendrick or whomever wants to make the argument, but that is a piece of evidence that will be put in at trial at the appropriate time. So
That piece of evidence being
Mr. Kendrick's,
statement where he does in fact say something different.
yes,
Is that what you're
about
saying?
himself, yes.
Okay.
So
And he's already made whatever that statement is by the time of this 2017 interview with Mr. Zachary.
he has.
Okay. And so whether Investigator Dennis talked to Mr. Kendrick himself or not, Mr. Dennis is aware that in fact Yak did say something different.
Right. He's
Okay.
saying, right. He's,
And
and it's a broad.
does Mr. Kendrick's interview, when we get to the top of page 116, Investigator Dennis is saying Yak said he was on his way to his girlfriend's house, I guess.
He does say that.
Okay. All right. And so,
Your Honor,
yeah.
I don't believe that's an accurate, I know why you're asking that question, and in the spirit that you're asking that question, I don't believe that's an accurate answer. Mr. Kendrick, first of all, a couple of things, and I bear with me. My understanding, Mr. Kendrick's statement has been suppressed.
Oh, no.
I don't think it's coming in.
She says no.
Judge,
Y'all,
the portion of the statement that it contains what we're discussing was not. What was suppressed is a portion where another detective comes in and starts talking to Mr. Kendrick.
Okay.
So there's a very long part of the interview.
Before the part that is
Yes.
suppressed, and it's in the unsuppressed part that the representations that you
Yes.
just made are contained.
I don't, Investigator Dennis on 116 line 8 says Yak said he was on his way to Bush's house
Yeah.
and they saw Nut at the barber shop and they made the call. I don't know if Mr. Kendrick's saying that to any law enforcement.
Well, we ought to be able to check that. I mean, right? Like the statement is,
And the made the call portion, I'll agree. That part he didn't say, but the part about him being on the way to Bush's house, which is what I think is the most.
No, and he didn't say he saw Nut at the barber shop. My recollection of the statement and Mr. Weinstein's most on top of what was said in that interview and what portions were suppressed, but he said, I did not have anything to do with this killing. I went to my girlfriend's house. That's my alibi. I don't know. So the state, yes, he said he was with Busha in a car with her going to her house. He never said seeing Nut at the barbershop and making a call. That was not stated. So that's a misrepresentation of Mr. Kendrick's statement, first of all. And secondly, I mean, it's just completely confusing to the jurors.
okay.
So, Your Honor, the state's response to that is when I stated there's information that Mr. Zachary and Detective Dennis exchanged before we reached the point where he says, that's not what Yak said.
Yeah.
And the reason that is important is that there's a compound sort of statement at the top of 116, and Mr. Sharp is correct regarding Mr. Kendrick not saying we made the call, but the part where he says he was on his way to Bush's house.
Right. That's not the part at issue. It's
Right.
and they saw Nut at the barbershop. Does Mr. Kendrick in his statement say anything about seeing Nut at the barbershop?
My memory is that he doesn't say they saw Nut at the barbershop.
Okay.
My memory is that he doesn't say that they saw Nut at the barbershop.
Okay. And
But that he was on his way to, so I'm not disputing that part.
Okay. So then that part needs, I would think, to be redacted out because it is confusing.
I have no problem with that. I just wanted the court to be aware of the argument that we were making.
Okay. So
if the statement is going to be introduced as evidence, the reason that we were not conceding that part is that Detective Dennis's.
that part's fine. I understand everybody's arguments. So let's get to what we are redacting out.
Yes, Your Honor.
So page 116, line 9, and they saw Nut at the barbershop. Frankly, why don't you just also skip line 10 and line 11?
Okay.
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 Does that satisfy your objection, Mr.
Yes,
Short?
Your Honor.
Okay.
Yes, Your Honor.
Oh, yeah.
Next one is on 117. No, what I'm looking at is number 40, which is what, oh, yes, on the other one, no, 9. Going back to number 39. The Yak said he was on the way to Busha House is fine. So the part that says, and they saw Nut at the barbershop, that part of 9, and then all of 10 and 11. Okay.
And just to clarify, Detective Dennis was one of the 3 in that interview.
Okay. Thank you. All right, as to the next one, Mr. Short, your objection is to in the investigator's statement, right? Or also the answer?
It's the investigator's statement, and I don't necessarily have a problem with the extent that he's asking Mr. Zachary a question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's appropriate for him to say, see, that's I done sat through so many interviews, heard so many different stories, kind of pieced
Right.
together by time dates.
In time frame. Okay. So
you said pokes holes in everybody's story.
So I would think maybe to avert that issue, can we consider a redaction from 117 lines 23 through 25, and then just start with 118 line 1, beginning with everything you just said pokes holes in everybody's story, because then Zachary says, yeah, you know, it does poke some holes, because you don't seem to be objecting to the answer.
I would suggest starting on 118 line 2.
Okay, that's fine. Well, oh, like 3 or 4 or 5 is the answer.
Yeah,
Okay, I thought he was saying this is the number of holes it might poke. Okay, yeah, no, that makes more sense. Okay. So,
We don't have any.
118, okay, so redact by agreement, then 117 line 22 through 118 line 2, the word story, and just pick back up with because of Demikian. All right. Okay.
Could you please pull your mic back up? Thank you.
Closer to me or further from me? Yes, ma'am.
Closer so we can hear you. All right.
Are we on 118?
All right. Why do you? All right. So the objection as to the 41 is that it's speculation. Is that right?
Right. It's a hypothetical. If it did, I'm reading that as if they did it. I don't think Demikian had anything to do with it. Why he ain't take it like you said, look at me and like little brother. I think in context, what he's articulating is people look at him as a little brother. And I mean, he wasn't there. He's not offering firsthand knowledge. He's just giving his theory that I don't think Demikian would be involved with something like that if they did it. And I just think that's speculation.
Does the state want to respond?
In as much as this is something that is repeated throughout Mr. Zachary's interview, and in as much as there is information that Demikian gave to Mr. Zachary, similar to the way that he gave information to another witness in this case who's now on the stand. The reason that I believe that this should remain in is that Mr. Zachary, at one point, Mr. Garlington was charged, but not by the state. And Mr. Zachary was in a position, he was with Mr. Garlington, Mr. Kendrick, and Mr. Stillwell after the murder, following the murder. So in as much as he makes the assertion, he later says more stuff like, Demekion never told me that he did it. He talks about what each person said to him. But I'll defer to the court. It's just that's the reason that I wasn't asking or conceding immediately
All right.
that come out.
I mean, that seems like a valid objection. So we're going to strike 118.24 through 119, line 5. I'm sorry, line 4.
This one. Yeah, share it. Share the file.
All right, and this is the witness, Zachary, relating what Demekion has told him. And the objection is hearsay. What's the state's response?
Oh, okay, on 121. Demekion's statements to Mr. Garlington, I'm sorry, to Mr. Zachary. Much like the statements that Mr. Garlington made to Mr. Copeland, are statements of a co-conspirator. Later in the interview, Mr. Zachary expressly says, essentially, it was a matter of keeping us all in the loop, the information that was exchanged. At one point, he's asked, why are you all talking for 30 minutes at the condo after the murder if nobody knows anything about it? And if not to that specific question, later on, Mr. Zachary says something to the effect of, we're just trying to keep each other in the loop so that we all know what's going on. In other words, from the way that I would argue it, Nut just got killed. Stuff, we have to keep ourselves.
Okay, so that would certainly make sense with regard to anything that got told to other alleged members of the gang right afterwards at the condo. As to this particular statement, Zachary actually gets asked, when did he tell you about that while y'all been locked down? And Zachary says, yeah, well, I've been locked up. So when was that? When did they get locked up?
So in the latter part of 2015.
Okay, and so if that is when this story gets shared.
So during that time, other evidence will show that as a result of the murder of Donovan Thomas, there were conflicts that existed both in to answer the court's, but I think the question is
Yeah.
how does it keep them safe? So the conspiracy that exists after Donovan Thomas is killed and before Donovan Thomas is killed doesn't stop when they get locked up. Inside the jail, there are conflicts as a result of the Donovan Thomas murder, and the knowledge or belief by members of If Gang that YSL is the entity responsible, or people within YSL are responsible. So the fact that Mr. Garlington is sharing with Mr. Zachary events that happened, I would argue still fall within the co-conspirator exception, or it still makes it admissible as a co-conspirator statement, but it's not something I'll hang a hat on, and if the court sees it differently, then just one second. I don't, it's not one that I'm gonna strongly object to. It's, so it is a co-conspirator statement. These statements within the rest of the interview that are very similar to this are all co-conspirator statements. And for that reason, we object to the co-conspirator statements coming out. I'll just leave it at that. And of course, it's not one that I'm going to, I'll defer to the court's decision, whatever it is. But I'd argue that it is a co-conspirator statement, but there are more statements similar to this made by Mr. Garlington to Mr. Zachary that he alludes to. So I'm going to be making a similar argument about other statements like this. And for that reason, I'm not going to object strenuously to this particular one coming out. Object strenuously.
All right, so late 2015, are there?
Can I give Your Honor a little context?
Yeah.
So Mr. Garlington and three other individuals, I believe it was three other individuals, including my client, Mr. Stillwell, warrants were taken out for them in around October of 2015, based on the testimony or the word of a gentleman named Nicholas Robinson, or Spencer Wright, depending on when you ask him. But he gave these statements to police. They went and Investigator Thorpe went and got warrants for these gentlemen. On subsequent review of the footage from the scene, Nicholas Robinson was not present where he claimed to be on the scene. So at the time of giving these statements, Mr. Garlington, and there's jail calls that I believe reflect this, Mr. Garlington is in extreme prove my innocence, shift blame mode. He's not in any sort of co-conspirator, we're in this together mode. And he is asserting to anyone and everyone that will listen is, I didn't have anything to do with this. I'm wrongfully arrested. He's asking people to get video from the McDonald's on Cleveland Avenue, video that we still don't have, that will show he's innocent.
Right.
And so these conversations that Quindarius Zachary is saying Mr. Garlington had with him are, from my perspective, for the purpose of asserting his innocence and shifting blame to others. So that would not fall under 801 D2E.
All right, and that's sort of what I'm trying to sort out is this a time that is when this is shared in furtherance of the conspiracy, or is it not? And if there are, in fact, still beefs going on inside of the jail or outside, I mean, do they get released after late 2015?
No, it dies down a lot.
No, sorry. I just asked a compound question. So I am wondering about what is the state of the beef back and forth. And then I'm also wondering, do Zachary and Garlington get released after they're locked up in late 2015?
No. So
Okay.
they get released at some point later, much later. For instance, Zachary gets prison time, Garlington also.
Right. Okay. But not at a point in time when like they might be out in a week and so they need to know what's going on the street. So they all need to.
Well, not on the streets.
Okay. So tell me, is there in the jails beefs back and forth where they all need to be on the same page about something? Tell me, how is this in furtherance of the conspiracy?
So while they are in the jail, and this is broadly speaking and not to this at this point in time, while they are in the jail, inclusive of this point in time, there are continued, there are statements made and conversations that are had about different YSL members getting beaten up by youth gangs.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
This is America's border czar, and she's failed us. Under Harris, over 10 million illegally here. 250,000 Americans dead from fentanyl. Brutal migrant crimes. And ISIS now here.
Do you have any plans to visit the border? You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. I mean, I don't understand the point that you're making.
Kamala Harris failed, weak, dangerously liberal.
How does that further the conspiracy?
Our argument is that it fosters cohesiveness. It is information shared between two YSL members while they are in the same predicament of being confined among other persons who are members of an opposition.
All right, so I mean, I think the fact that on at 122 page 122 lines 1 through 3, the answer being that Garlington said, you know, no, he does not. He says that Woody picked him up after the shooting. That's not, hey, Betty, I've got absolutely zero to do with this. It is still something that could in some way be against his penal interest. So I am going to find that to meet that co-conspirator exception. So I'm going to overrule the objection on that one.
So it just for clarification, so we're playing from 1 to 3 on 1.6.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, meaning I understand the court rule.
Yeah, no, I understand. I understand. But yes, that's probably a good idea to clarify that for the record. All right, so moving to number 43, which starts at the beginning of page 124 and is most of that page. All right, what does the state say about this one?
So, Your Honor, in order for the argument is that it's hearsay about what the Demekian said, and
Is that the argument or is the argument here? I mean, at least what's on the, yeah, it's false hearsay, if you will.
I'm sorry, I was looking at 42, 43.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was my impression, and really for my notes, the fact that whether it was truly what Demekian said or not truly what Demekian said, the falsity is irrelevant. I take exception to Investigator Dennis relaying in a statement that would be heard by the jury what Demekion Garlington supposedly said to him. Demekion Garlington is not going to take the stand, to my understanding, in this case.
All right. Is Demekion Garlington's statement going to come in?
No, his statement to law enforcement will not come in. And will
Okay.
not follow. And for that reason, I don't object to 1 through 4 on page 24, but when we get into, again, Zachary talking about what was shared to him by Mr. Garlington, we would object to that portion, but I don't have an objection to 1 through 4. The numbers 1 through 4, but the objection, the redaction requested is 1 through 22, so I'm prepared to argue the rest of it. So in as much as the argument made just now by Mr. Shard is his objection is to Detective Dennis relaying what Garlington said, there's no objection to that portion.
Okay. Okay, so you're saying 5 through 22 is essentially just questioning. It's not any true or false assertion of what Garlington said. It's just him asking questions and Zachary answering them, right?
So it is sort of, it's him. So there was one thing, and I'm sorry, I apologize for doing this. It is much as Mr. Zachary acknowledges knowing that the police talked to Demekion Garlington. And in as much as that is contained within 1 through 3, I'd ask that the court keep that in and allow me to change that portion of my previous representation to the court.
Okay, is there gonna, well, what about, then what are we doing about line 4?
That that's the part that I believe is not proper. I think that's a testimonial statement to the company.
Okay, so then let me go back to Mr. Shart. If 4 is redacted out, then what is your objection to the rest of it?
I don't have an objection to 1 and 3. I do, so to the extent that these are being brought in for Quindarius Zachary's answers,
Yeah.
and this is gonna bleed into number 44 on my list.
Okay.
It goes into, my understanding is this information Quindarius Zachary is giving Investigator Dennis is based on things Demekion Garlington, it's being asserted that Demekion Garlington told Zachary in the jail when Garlington was trying to proclaim his innocence.
Okay.
So that is, I don't feel that these answers fall under the 801 D2E because, again, I don't feel that they're in furtherance of a conspiracy. The statements made in the jail. So that would be my objection to the answers.
Okay.
And those are interspersed in what I objected to in number 43 and then specifically in 44 as well.
Okay.
And my perspective on that, for the reasons that I've already shared, are different than Mr. Sharp's. And I would add to what I've already said, that in considering, if it even comes to playing it, in considering what Mr. Zachary is telling the police and making a determination about whether to take it as true or not, Mr. Zachary at line 23, when challenged, essentially Detective Dennis is challenging him about what he has said in line 13 through 16. He says, as what's reflected in the transcript, Zachary pushes back, and then Dennis is asking another set of questions, and Zachary is correcting Dennis with information that he got from Garlington, again, still during this time, they are in confinement, and still during a time when there is still beef, if you will, between the two groups, YSL and FK. So to the extent that Garlington may want to get out of jail, I'm not understanding there to be any argument that Garlington is somehow an agent or another, just that Garlington wants to get out of jail. And somehow that makes this not a co-conspirator statement.
Right, that he's no longer saying anything. He's saying about, here's what happened, Zachary. Hey, Zachary, here's what happened. Because you're my fellow gang member and you need to know this. He's saying, I am innocent of all of this, in the hope that either, I don't know whether he cares whether Zachary believes it or not, but in hopes that that gets out.
And my position is that would be an argument to be made. Obviously, the jury can take what they hear and throw it.
Okay, but I have to make an evidentiary determination whether this is a statement made in furtherance of the conspiracy, which is what we're discussing.
And our position is that it is for the reasons that we've given to the court.
All right, I'm gonna allow it. And that would be what you cover in your item number 43. And then what I've looked at right now is the first part of your 44, which is through page 125, line 15. It looks like then there's a second set of facts. So I hadn't looked at that or made a ruling about that yet. So.
I understand.
Okay.
And we can get to that if Your Honor would like to, because number 45, I'm going to withdraw.
Okay.
So that puts us back at the second part of 44.
Okay. All right. So the second part of 44 is on page 126, well, all of 126 and then half of 127. So let me take a look at that real fast and then is it the same argument as to this also?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, let me just take a look at it. All right, let me ask you, on page 126, lines 15 through 18, seems like there might be a separate objection to that little part. Or you had withdrawn the gun part anyway?
I understand, Your Honor. He says that's
If you don't care, I don't care
Well, he says
either.
that's what I assume, and then he says that's what I heard. The source, I wasn't going.
If it
we
doesn't,
assume that the source of that's what I heard is Demekion Garlington, it would fall under the same.
okay. All right, I just wanted to make sure.
I'll just point out at the bottom of 126, I think Investigator Dennis agrees with my view on these statements. That it's people putting their own version of their defense to try to say that they weren't involved. And that's the point I guess I'm trying to make.
So I suspect we'll see that on a slide during your closing argument. All right, yeah, no, my ruling is the same with regard to item 46. So that is in. All right, that takes us to 47, which is on 129. I'm not sure I follow your objection. To 140, to your item number. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, I'm sorry. 47. Your item number 47, 129, 1 through 14.
46, I thought we were on. But I will withdraw 46.
Okay. Okay, so now to 47. It says speculation about getting rid of guns, but the speculation about getting rid of guns seems to occur sort of after line 14. And your objection was to lines 1 through 14.
I agree, Your Honor, and I am going to withdraw number 47 as well.
All right, so moving to item 48 on page 140.
I'll withdraw that one.
All right, seems to help you. All right, 141, line 11 through first part of 142. And is there your objection that the questions by the investigator are based on hearsay?
The questions are based on hearsay. You know, he's declaring, Investigator Dennis, they're inviting responses, I guess, but they're kind of more statements. He's saying that basically my client is involved in a list of shootings, and then he eventually lists them. One of them, I think we already discussed, Lucci's Mama House is the words he uses. We already discussed that I believe we already discussed that was based on what Mr. Zachary told him, which was based on hearsay. He wasn't there. So it's just based on rumors. He's just recapping what Zachary said, and what Zachary said has already been ruled coming out, is my recollection. So Lucci's Mama House, he said he did the bus. We've already established that Mr. Zachary wasn't present at the shooting of the bus. So Mr. Zachary wasn't allowed to talk about, or we're not going to play what Mr. Zachary said regarding who did the shooting. But so I don't know why we would allow Investigator Dennis to repeat it. And then in the murder, I mean, that's a question for the jury here. And I understand that there's certain things that are helpful. Mr. Zachary says, I don't think he did the murder. I would like that to come in, but not in the context of Investigator Dennis listing a bunch of other shootings that are on this indictment that he's concluded my client has done.
Of whom?
Right.
So if we're talking about page 141, starting at line 11, from what I'm hearing, there is no objection to no, he does object to it. Okay, I see what he said. Your Honor, Mr. Zachary he's conveying something about Mr. Stillwell, at least his current iteration of events about Mr. Stillwell. He's saying he wasn't in a lot of shootings and stuff.
Right.
Dennis is saying essentially, what, really? And Zachary is reiterating the point. And then Dennis is asking for clarification. When Zachary says it's probably so many shootings, and then later on he says they go all the way back to 2014. He's clarifying information he's giving to Dennis, and he is giving information that we would argue he does have a basis for knowing. I don't have a problem taking out he did the murder. But the three biggest ones from line 6 through 7, we would argue that those are events or incidents which Mr. Garlington does have information about.
Okay, so I think that (141) lines 11 through 25 are okay.
Can I state my specific objection to that?
Yeah.
Okay, so On 11 to 25, on page 141, what I'm specifically objecting to is when Investigator Dennis says,
Can you pick up your mic? I'm sorry. I know that's kind of
Right.
annoying, but
no, it's fine. He says, right, and he just basically was, from what I've gathered in basically interviewing people and him, again, I don't know when Investigator Dennis, to my information and belief, only spoke to Mr. Stillwell as a victim in a case where a young woman was killed back in 2015. So I don't know where "and him" comes from. He was quiet until it was time for some action, and then it was almost like sick him.
okay.
So he's like basically saying my client is, a leash pit bull.
Okay. All right. Okay. So then let's strike that question 11 through 14 because it's really not it kind of interjects, and if you went straight from Zachary talking his answer from 7 to 10 and then pick up with what he continues to say 15 to 17, I mean that works just as well. So and you're nodding, Miss Love, you agree?
Yes.
Okay. So 11 through 14 are redacted by agreement on page 141. And then 15 through 25 of that page, I'm going to permit in. And then,
So
yeah.
my issue with 142 is Investigator Dennis says,
Yeah, no, I'm getting to
Okay.
that.
Okay,
getting
I'm
to that.
sorry.
And maybe you'll be satisfied.
all right,
I don't know, but whether you are or not, this is my thought at this point is 15 through 25 are in, and then redact on page 142, 1 through 8, and pick up with line 9. And that avoids all of the Dennis saying something about a shooting that okay. Does that work for you, Miss Love?
Yes.
So Miss Love agrees to that. So Mr. Shart, I
That
want to
works.
make sure that, so that, do you have any further commentary with regard after that ruling?
no, Your Honor.
Okay. Let me. All right, moving us to page 146. Okay.
Judge, good morning. Keith Adams on
Good
behalf
morning.
of Mr. Williams. So this is number 50 on Mr. Shard's checklist.
Yep.
The entirety of this testimony and the context of it is that this is a conversation where Mr. Sprinkle's involved, the detectives are involved, and they're talking to Mr. Zachary about what they believe to be a beef, for lack of a better word, between Mr. Williams and the Quantas Lamar, gentleman known as Rich Homie Quan. In short, my objection for this entire segment of the conversation, starting at 146, line 20, going all the way to 149.3, is that it's speculation. If you read through it, Mr. Zachary is opining about the reason that, well, first he's opining that there's a beef, in fact, a beef between Mr. Williams and Mr. Lamar. And he opines as to what the reasons are.
Right.
The detectives are kind of interjecting their own take on what has happened and why they fell out. And if the most telling part is if you look at page 149, towards the end of that, and it really kind of starts at the end of 148, where Mr. Zachary's talking about how Mr. Lamar and Mr. Williams fell out, and Birdman, a Rich Homie, fell out for some reason. I don't know, he says, continues on to page 149, where the investigator asks him because he wouldn't sign. And then Mr. Zachary says, I don't know, I guess. That kind of encapsulates the fact that most of what he's talking about is what he's heard, what may be on the street. And there's no real basis where that speculation is coming from. So I'd ask that all of that be kept out because it's just speculative.
All right. Well, I think that you're right with regard to the very end of 148, top of 149 about, Birdman and Rich Homie having fallen out, and, the reason that might have happened being speculation on the part of Zachary. But that's kind of a separate topic from everything that they're talking about before.
Well, if you look at the entire, even starting back at 146 and going through, there are portions, for example, let's look at 148, the top of 148, line 1, where Mr. Zachary says something to the effect of, and Rich Homie knew that they were shooting, that they had done shot up Thug. There's no way that he would know what's in Mr. Lamar's mind, what he knew. There's nothing to indicate the basis of that knowledge. And I will say that Mr. Lamar is a state's witness. He's on the witness list. We've been noticed that he's potentially going to be called. Birdman is on the state's witness list. Mr. Brian Williams. We've been noticed that he may potentially be called. And so these are witnesses that if the state intends to prove their theory, I'm going to say it's their theory, that there was this beef between Mr. Williams and Mr. Lamar, and that's relevant in some form or fashion. They have witnesses that they can call to do that.
All right, but they can corroborate their own witness testimony with something else if they got something else. So that's not an evidentiary objection. That may just be wishful thinking.
Well, yeah, I don't know if they're going to call those witnesses.
I don't either.
And if they want to corroborate, if they call them and they want to corroborate it, then they can say perhaps that Mrs. Zachary knew this in some form or fashion, heard it from those witnesses, but there's no indication that this is anything other than speculation on the part of Mr. Zachary.
All right, Ms. Love.
So, Your Honor, I think some context is necessary here. There have been repeated attempts by Mr. Williams to rebut evidence the state believes has shown that Mr. Lamar and he fell out after Donovan Thomas's murder.
Okay.
Donovan Thomas's father was one of our witnesses, and some of the questions on cross-examination involved Defendant Williams showing photographs of Mr. Lamar and Mr. Williams together at times that were after, I believe after the shooting, if I'm remembering the exhibits correctly. There were Instagram posts and things of that nature, a video of Mr. Lamar and Mr. Williams a music video of them that they both appeared in.
Yeah.
And that was after specific questions regarding Mr. Lamar's continued association with Mr. Williams after Mr. Thomas's death.
Okay.
When ADA Sprinkle asks in line 18 through 19 of page 146, so what happened? Why weren't they working together anymore? The answer Mr. Zachary gives, his basis for knowing that information, or at least broadly that information, is contained within the statements that he gives just prior to that, when he's talking about having been on tour, being on tour with defendant Williams during this long period of time. So in line 9, when ADA Sprinkle asks, you know about Young Thug getting up on stage in March of 2015, calling Rich Homie Quan, bitch Homie Quan.
Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Zachary says, I was with him, yeah. And then ADA Sprinkle says, you weren't there? And Zachary says, I was with him when he said that.
Yeah.
So these statements provide a basis for Mr. Zachary's knowledge of whether or not defendant Williams and Mr. Lamar continued to work together.
Okay. And I mean, I noticed on page 147, line 19, no, line 20, I mean, Mr. Zachary's saying, like, basically, I stay at the same place as Bug does in that apartment building too. So he's got a basis for knowing what he is saying on 146 and 147 and 148. Now, I agree that 149 starting at 23 is kind of a different topic and speculation. So I'm going to strike that, and the objection went through. 149 line 3, that I'm going to strike, but
And-
just that, the rest of it.
Judge, I just wanted to make one correction regarding line 20 of page 147. So
Yeah.
it wasn't that reference was meant for Mr. Lamar, not, even though it says we, you have to listen to it. I think it was he, I think.
Oh, okay.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you.
That's correct. What
Appreciate
he's
it.
saying is that Rich Homie
Okay.
stayed in the same
Well, it
building.
says we, but I guess that's either a typo or a mistranscription. Okay. All right. So then, what
But
is his basis then for knowing all of this?
I was about to say, but even with that, he's describing he's describing later on how much time he spends in the condo. And I believe at one point he even talks about the fact that he went down on one occasion and let somebody in.
Okay.
When asked, how do people get in? They were trying to ask him about a call box, but he's saying, I went and let them in. No. So he spends and talks about the amount of time he spends, a lot of time with Mr. Williams in that condo. So my argument is that he, throughout the interview, he gives a basis for that knowledge.
Okay.
The only thing that I'd follow up with on that, Judge, is that,
All right.
that's a different point, right? The fact that he knows Rich Homie Quan, the fact that he knows Jeffrey Williams, the fact that he knows where someone lives, the fact that he went and let someone in does not give him the basis of knowledge of what is in someone's mind or why someone fell out. That's what the conversation is about.
All right. So, Ms. Love, what's your response to that?
So I would argue that his proximity with Mr. Williams and his association and relationship with Mr. Williams, as reflected in the fact that he's always at the condo, even on occasions when Mr. Williams is not there, is the basis for a knowledge of why they don't work together, and a basis for his knowledge of what happened.
Okay, and you have evidence that establishes their close relationship at this period in time.
Yes, his
Okay.
words, Mr.
Okay.
Zachary's words throughout the interview.
All right.
Are
Then-
reflective of that.
Okay. Then I will stand on my prior ruling.
So just to be clear, Judge, what is the court saying will be kept out?
148, line 23 through 149, line 3. All right, we're at the bottom of 152 now. All right, Miss Love, why would this be in?
So we have already introduced the evidence of the Dexter Montgomery shooting. That's what this information is, starting at page 152, line 24. We have already introduced evidence that DK or Walter Murphy and Nard or Demise McMullen were the persons who committed the shooting that led to the victim's head being blown off, half of it. Mr. Zachary's assertions about who did that, I would argue, come from his relationship with members of YSL, with Walter Murphy and Demise McMullen, or other members of YSL. The portions where there's commentary by Detective Dennis, for instance, the part about page 153, lines 14 through 19, I don't have an objection to.
Right.
As well as lines 20 through 25, I don't have an objection to. Because those are not things that Quindary Zachary is telling Detective Dennis. That's Dennis.
Well, then how about 154, 1 through at least 14, but that's all just the investigators talking
At least 14.
about basically their own investigation.
I don't have any.
Frank? Yeah.
So there's a portion where Mr. Zachary is, you see it on the video, he's looking at what they're showing him. So where I don't have any problem with, for instance, 1 through 4, on page 154, I would ask that 5 through 17 be kept in, because that's the portion where he's,
Looking at pictures.
right, either has just looked at pictures, and Dennis is now saying that right there is DK walking
Okay.
with an assault rifle.
All right. So
And-
that's 5 through 8.
Yes, 5 through 8.
Okay.
And as I think I just said it, but if I didn't, 9 through 14 is, I don't have any objection to that coming out.
Okay, but what about the rest of 154, basically? That's the investigators counting bodies. And
Part of-
all Zachary says is basically like, who are you talking about?
So I don't have any problem. I don't have any objection, rather, I'm sorry,
Okay.
to that coming out. And so that's from.
That's basically 153 line 14 through 154 line 4, and then 154 line 9 through 24.
Yes, no objection.
All right, so let's circle back to 152 line 20. Through 153 line 13.
I don't have any objection to 153 lines 1 through 13. So I guess that's all of
All right.
153.
All right, so what about 152 17 to the bottom? Or 20, I'm sorry, 20 to the bottom. Although I think it's 17 to the bottom, because I think that's like the lead into.
It is. He's asking about the Dexter Montgomery shooting. I don't remember the exact words at 18, but it is.
Yeah.
I would argue that as to that,
I mean, I don't know. It may be significant to your case that he's even heard about it. So I don't know. You tell me.
well, that's the point that I was making earlier, was that it was his proximity and relationship with the other members of YSL that afford him the knowledge about Nard and DK doing it. And we have shown evidence that Nard and DK did it. So we would
Okay.
object to that part coming.
All right. So 20 through 22, essentially, then, or 17 through 22, you're saying that shows, although it doesn't show the basis, who he heard it from, but
It doesn't, but if us with the
all coupled together would show he heard it from.
other members of
Okay.
YSL.
So, I mean, I think that then, could be relevant to the state's case, and you're offering it there to show he heard about it and that they kept each other connected. So that I will leave in. But what'd you hear about it? 23 and 24 out.
No, 24, he says, you can't see it on here, but on the tape, I can give you the timestamp. He says, they say DK and Nard did it.
Okay. Okay.
I just don't understand how that's not hearsay.
It is hearsay. It's hearsay that is being permitted under the co-conspirator exception.
Who, I would ask the state who, if I'm permitted by the court, who told him this?
So as I understand Miss Love's representations to the court are that fellow members of the gang told him. Is that right, Ms. Love?
The basis for his having that knowledge would be his proximity and relationship an association with other YSL members. What I said when I first spoke on this is we would not ask for rank hearsay. We would establish a foundation. And if we don't establish a foundation, if we don't establish that it was a member of YSL, like if he's just like the streets talk, then we would not ask who did it or do you hear who did it and then try to impeach him with what he said.
Okay, so essentially, as long as she lays that foundation, that's the basis of the witness's knowledge.
And just moving forward, and because I don't know the answer to this question, but I do know that Mr. DK is Mr. Murphy, Nard is Mr. McMullen. They were arrested and charged for this event. They may have already been arrested by the time they're having this conversation. I don't know the answer to that. But I just think that there's a lot of different ways that Mr. Zachary could come to that conclusion other than a co-conspirator statement. And I just want to be clear, we are putting, if they don't establish a foundation, should this tape be played, the ball is in their court to make sure all this is taken out.
Correct? All right, you clear about that? Yes. Okay. So make sure that that foundation is laid before, to the extent you end up needing to play this, that you have laid that foundation before you play it.
That is what I understand the purpose of this exercise.
All right, so we're clear then, assuming that foundation, 152:17 through 24 come in, 153, all of 153 and 154 are out by agreement. And we hadn't kind of picked apart 155 and the top of 156 yet.
Did you say all of 154 or?
Yeah, that seems to be what you ultimately agreed to.
5 through 8.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. With the exception of 5 through 8. Thank you. Sorry. You're right. All right, so how about 155?
I don't have any objection to 155.
All right, 155 is redacted by agreement. And then the top of 156, 1 through 6.
So
Next item is 157, 1 through 22.
our argument is that it's co-conspirators. statements. And I don't know if the court wants to hear from Mr. Sharp first. So if the court does, I'll just wait. But our argument is that this, we would object to this coming out because Mr. Zachary is asked on the previous page, page 156 at line 7, about his prior statement.
Right.
And as I said earlier, what he's doing within this statement is he's acknowledging that he said it, he's maintaining what he told them in the 2015 interview regarding what 2 of the defendants on trial now said to him. But he is qualifying it and asserting, maybe they did. Acknowledging they said that they did, but offering as well his opinion, I don't believe they really did it though. And so when Mr. Bailey at line 7 on page 156, what he's asking him that is listed on the transcript as indiscernible is the first time that you talked to Dennis and Gaither, what did you tell them about Shannon? And Mr. Zachary just sort of says, yeah, and Mr. Bailey asks him again. I think a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
And then at line 17 on page 156, he's talking about that he says, in line 15 and 16, Mr. Bailey says, what did you say they told you? And in response, it's listed as indiscernible, but that's what he's asking. What did you tell investigators that they told you? And in 17 and 18, Mr. Zachary is saying that they shot at Nutt, but later on, he told me he didn't do it though. So we'd argue that one, there's a reason we would want to play that part and into page 157, because now everybody sort of knows that there's a statement and people are talking, people are telling on members of YSL. There's communication in jail calls and in other places reflecting members of YSL's sort of incredulity, their, like dismay at the fact that various people are telling.
Mm-hmm.
I think at some point there's a definite call that Lil D, and that's when Darius Zachary is called Lil D. Demekion Garlington is also called Lil D, but there is a jail call where they say Lil D told or Lil D is telling. And Mr. Zachary, now being aware that people know he gave that August 2015 statement, is trying to come up, pull back some of it. So we want to play it to show evidence of the enterprise itself, how it operates, what happens when people tell, and how people react. All of that, we argue that it's relevant evidence and not just hearsay.
Okay.
Well, that is a way to bootstrap hearsay, to say we want to play the hearsay to show the way people react to someone saying the hearsay. But my objection is 157 line 1 to 22. And I'll just say, Ms. Love just keeps saying, Quindarius Zachary is saying what they say, or they said. On 157 line 7, in my notes, Quindarius Zachary says no, and then indiscernible. What indiscernible is Demekion says. Demekion says that they were all in the car. They were all in the car. In what car? In they rental car is what it says on the tape. So he's repeating what Demekion Garlington told him in the jail while he's trying to assert his innocence. And Demekion is putting himself out as being dropped off outside the car and putting and then eventually putting Shannon, Mr. Kendricks, Mr. McMullen, and Mr. Cobb in the car. So it goes back to the same argument that I'm making, and I know Your Honor hasn't necessarily agreed with me in the past, but I still have to make the argument that these were statements that Demekion Garlington is strategically giving to Mr. Zachary, not to further any conspiracy, but to get out of jail. And he's trying to put his narrative out there, and that falls under, we've provided the cases to the court previously, Stafford, Wilkins, and there's two others, but it's spilling the beans, and there's one of those cases that I've given specifically that had to do with shifting blame. And he's shifting blame, and that's just does not fall, and my argument is that does not fall under 801D to E.
Your
Thank
Honor, my interpretation of page 157, at least lines 1. My interpretation of it is that they are talking about up to a point at the very least, something that Shannon said. I don't disagree that it bleeds into comments about Demekion Garlington, and I'd ask for the court, with respect to the finer points, to give me 1 second. So in the 2015 interview, Mr. Zachary tells police, and we'll get to that when we address those redactions. He tells the police that he doesn't know what in the world made them do that. And he was asked by Detective Gaither, made what do that? And Mr. Zachary says, people who killed him, Shannon, Yak, Nard. And then Detective Gaither says, Nard in jail for kidnapping. Mr. Zachary says, yeah, and Duop. He's then asked what Duop looks like. Then Detective Gaither says, how do you know this? Mr. Zachary says, because they told me. Detective Gaither says, who told you? In August 2015, Quindarius Zachary says, Shannon and Yak told me. Detective Gaither says, why did they tell you that? Mr. Zachary says, we were at the house talking about it. Detective Gaither says, which house? Mr. Zachary says, Thug's house. Question, new or old? Mr. Zachary says, the old one, his condo down there. Detective Gaither says, exactly what did they say? And then from there, Mr. Zachary goes into a recitation of events that he says he got from Shannon and Yak. So the argument that this information came from Demekion Garlington, who was just trying to clear his own name, is belied, I think, by the information that the court will hear Mr. Zachary give in 2015.
Okay. In your honor, I don't dispute that Mr. Zachary has said that Mr. Stillwell, that he's claimed that Mr. Stillwell and Mr. Kendricks made statements to him. That's not the point. And when we deal with those statements, we can address, we'll address those statements in the arguments. But in this particular statement, and we can listen to the tape, my notes say on line 7, Demekion says that they were all in the car. They were all in the car. This information that we're dealing with right now, the source out of Mr. Zachary's own mouth, is the source is Demekion. And that's what's on the table before us right now.
All right, so if we go back to 156, line 7, which is where this objection, I think, begins. No, it doesn't. But no, it doesn't. But if we go back there, at that point, they're talking about what Zachary told them way back in 2015, the source of which was the conversations amongst people at Mr. Williams' old Midtown condo. So close in time to the murder. And so y'all seem to know what a lot of the indiscernibles say. So on 156 at around line 16, I mean, they're talking about, what did you tell them about Shannon? And then line 17, what's line 16 say? Do we know?
I'll tell you.
I can pull that up.
I'll tell you right now. On line 15 to 16, Charlie Bailey says in that interview, what did you say Shannon said?
Okay.
So that clarifies that portion.
Okay.
Need that.
So,
And Your Honor, it's only 1 minute from line 13 on page 1, or line 14 on page 156 to line 8 on page 157. So there are short intervals between them if there is a point at which we can play anything that helps clarify things.
And I understand that, but in that short interval, he switches to say Demekion says that it was all in the car. So I mean, it does. He switches the declarant, and that doesn't take much time to do, and that's what he did in this conversation.
Because I don't.
So I don't know who is, I see that it says Demekion told Shannon, but then it says Shannon didn't do it. He's saying they was in the car though. That he could be, who knows? That could be either of them.
I can't speak to that.
He said they was in the car when it happened, but they didn't see nothing. So I don't know what the basis for that.
Well, and that's Investigator Underwood talking at that point. So I don't know. Investigator Underwood's statement doesn't make a lot of sense in that context to me now, but I believe that the transcript is accurate.
So in 2015, during this first statement, does Zachary say that Shannon Stillwell maintained that he was in the car?
He says, he says that, but in a more, even a more absurd.
Okay. And then does he also at that point before say that Garlington was in the car, at least in the car?
You're talking about the 2005, the early 2000, the earlier statement?
Mm-hmm.
He says, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Not in the car that.
In either of the two cars.
So in a car, but not the car that is doing the
Right.
shooting.
Okay. But this, whether it was Garlington or Shannon saying that they were in the car, but not that car. In 2015, when Zachary talked to law enforcement, did he at that point as well say that both Shannon and Garlington were in the car, a car, one of the two cars?
Yes.
Okay. So then I don't think it really matters who the he is there, because he's already said that. So that can't be based only on now Garlington saying some other story to get out of it. So I think 156 lines, well, y'all don't have an issue with that, but 157, 1 through 3 seems fine, because he has a basis for knowing that is from before. And when we get down to 7, are you saying that now that answer that I think Demekian said that they was all in the car?
Correct. He said, no, the quote that I have in my notes from this statement is, no, Demekian says that they was all in the car. They was all in the car. And then investigator Underwood says, in what car? When Darius Zachary says, in they car, they rental car.
Right.
And then Underwood says, when it happened, well, and the rest is as described in the transcript.
Okay. I mean, none of that is Demekian saying anything that really is like, I was in no way involved in this.
Well, my understanding of what Demekian's saying, and just to add
Is that
context.
I was involved with all of it up until the point when conveniently I got dropped off.
Right.
Right.
My understanding of what the story is Demekian's in the car. They're riding down the street. He gets dropped off. People switch cars.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says who was in the car ultimately when it pulled off. And he wasn't in the car at that point.
And Your Honor, the information that Mr. Zachary shares in 2015, he says that he got that night or the next day. So he got before Mr. Garlington was ever arrested. So to the extent that the argument is, well, at least partially what I understand it to be regarding Mr. Garlington, the information that's being shared is information that Mr. Zachary previously asserted came from his conversations with defendants Kendrick and Stillwell.
Okay. I'm going to allow 156 line 7 through 157 line 22.
And can I just ask one thing?
Sure.
I don't want to disagree with Ms. Love about her characterization of what Zachary says Garlington said to him before, because quite honestly, I don't remember until we go over the transcript. But if in fact that transcript from 2015, earlier 2015, does not reveal that Garlington gave him information at that time, could we revisit?
Sure.
And I was saying, and if I said I said Kendrick and Stillwell.
Yeah.
Well, right, we know, but Kendrick and Stillwell, we know that, but it seems to me that Ms. Love is asserting that in 2015, Zachary is claiming that Garlington had already given him information prior to Garlington being arrested. And I don't know that to be true.
I don't know that that's what she was saying. Because what I had asked her was did he already have a basis for knowing all of that back?
He didn't. Mr. Stillwell and Mr. Kendricks allegedly gave Mr. Zachary information.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to agree that all of this information is included in that information. My stance, my belief is that this is information that was given by Mr. Garlington while he was incarcerated, which affects the analysis of the co-conspirator statement. And I don't believe it. And I understood the state's, and if that's not the state's argument, I understood the state's argument as, well, Zachary in his earlier statement had said that Garlington had already given him the information. And I don't know that to be true.
I don't think that's what she said, actually. But what I'm saying is, Mr. Garlington may think that if he puts a story out there that he was with all of the people alleged to have committed this crime as parties to a crime up until, 2 minutes beforehand, hops out and then gets picked up 2 minutes later, that gets him off the hook. I mean, that's wishful thinking, although apparently, I don't know. Anyway, I think he is still inculpating himself to me. So I guess I'm saying I understand, but reject your argument that this is, even if said during the jail stage, is at a point where it is no longer in furtherance of the conspiracy. I'm also saying it appears that Zachary had all of this information the first time around also.
Okay, that's the part I'm not
Okay.
necessarily.
And that may not be true, but if that changes, you can let me know. But my other ruling still is, adverse to your position.
Understood.
All right. But it legitimately, we need to get it cleared up. So, all right. So 158 lines 12 through 21. Actually, lunch is here. So why don't we break for lunch until, let's say 1:20.
Choke no joke. I'll see y'all in the hour and 10.